Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Rising Tide Photography Summit. I'm your host, Angel McNaul. I'm a landscape photographer, photography coach, and the founder of Basecamp Photo Club. And I'm super excited to have with us today very special guest, Eric Bennett. For those of you guys who don't know Eric Bennett, Eric is a world traveler, workshop leader, and a Utah-based professional landscape photographer. He's the author of 3 coffee table books, one of which is just getting ready to be released. And he's a frequent contributor to magazines such as Outdoor Photography Magazine and several others, which I had written down here, and now they're not showing.
Yeah, usually
Anyway,
On Landscape, which is a web magazine, and Elements as well, also a digital magazine. Um, yeah, those are the main ones I contribute to. Oh, and also Nature Vision magazine, which just started up. Uh, they have 1 issue out so far.
that's amazing. So I'm super excited to have you here today. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me, Angel. I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, for sure. So, I could talk to Eric about so many things. He just has a really unique style and, obviously very successful as a landscape photographer. But the one thing that I really wanted to talk to Eric about was when I started doing some research and I found out about his books. I was really intrigued by, just these beautiful books that he's putting out. And I wanted to ask him about that because I think that's kind of like, a goal for a lot of landscape photographers is that we'd like to get published in magazines or maybe eventually put together our own book, whether that's just for personal enjoyment or it's something that we want to share and sell. So Eric has agreed to kind of walk us through the process and so I'm very excited about that. So let's get started with the basics. How did you get into photography in the first place?
That is not a super straightforward question. I kind of stumbled on photography because I was working as a videographer professionally ever since I was a teenager. And once DSLR started having super great video capability, I started making videos with a DSLR, which obviously has the capability of taking great photos as well. And so I kind of started dabbling in like time lapse photography. So I was still like turning the photographs into a video product at the end of the day. But then I started kind of noticing like how the still frames, the single individual frames in my time lapses looked. And I started getting more in tune with like composition and focusing more on the lighting. And I was also getting more into spending time in nature at that time because I had just moved to Utah. And there isn't a whole lot to do in Utah apart from hiking and backpacking and camping and stuff. So I kind of just started doing that with my friends. And then as spending time in nature became more important to me, I just had this feeling that photography was a better way to convey the special experiences that I was having in nature and also the value of the places and the importance that I see in them. So I just started taking more photographs and doing less video. And eventually I started getting contacted for like small photography work. People wanted to buy prints and stuff. And so I started to see it as kind of a viable option as a career. And I ended up just quitting videography entirely professionally. I still do some videos for myself, like I have tutorial videos and things. So I use that skill to make those. But yeah, photography became my full time job about 10 years ago. So that's pretty much how I got into it.
That's very cool. So you you've developed a real style. And as I was reading about you on your website and everything, like just one thing that I love about your photography is that your love of nature really shows through. And I think that it's because you show us the details and kind of like an intimate look at nature. And that requires, I think, really when you go out into the field, you need to slow down. And, I think the tendency sometimes, especially where you live, I mean, in Utah, you're like, oh, nothing, just world class hiking all the time. That's the only thing there is to do.
Yeah, I'm very
But you know,
spoiled.
you can, yeah, you can walk up to these grand landscapes, and sometimes it can be overwhelming. So what's your process like when you go out and, I mean, you see all these grand landscapes and stuff, but what's your process of sort of like slowing down, going in and deciding like what you want to capture in terms of like the smaller scenes and the details?
I think the simplest way that I can put it is when I go to any kind of place, um, there are always many different things that speak to me and call my attention. It's never just like one big broad scene, um, or kind of like everything around me just like speaks to me equally. There's always like these little vignettes and pieces of the scenes that I really enjoy and that captivate me. And I've just realized, if you try to show everything, you end up showing nothing because nothing really stands out as the subject of the photograph. And so I realized it was a much more effective way of telling the story behind certain things or showing why something spoke to me or why I found it important or interesting by isolating different subjects within the landscape and making individual photographs. So instead of trying to create one photograph that somehow captures the essence of everything in front of me, I tend to dissect them down into many different photographs to show all these different sides of a place and also let those details and more nuanced things really stand out because otherwise they're not going to be noticed by the viewer, I don't think. And so um subject is also a really important thing for me. I always want people to be able to tell right away what the photograph is about. I like to make abstract photographs where, a lot of times you can't tell what the photograph is literally, but you can still see the pattern or the composition or, what it was that spoke to me. I think I always hope to effectively convey that because if I'm not, then at the end of the day, it's like, what's the point of making a photograph if you're not trying to show something intentionally or trying to make someone feel the same way as you do about something? So I really approach, like if you look at my portfolio, I have plenty of, really wide angle scenes. I have a lot of mid range scenes and I have a lot of intimate scenes. And the thing is, though, I really approach them all in the same way. I try to distill each scene down to the most important elements and never have anything superfluous or unnecessary. So it really comes down to inclusion and exclusion. And I would say that I practice exclusion a lot more than I practice inclusion. I'm really picky with what I choose to include within my frame. And so it's just something that naturally happens. A lot of places it's more likely that you are only going to find one or two or three, just a handful of elements that are cohesive and work together rather than like a dozen. And so it just a lot of times I just end up making really simple, small, intimate scenes because it just doesn't work to go any wider. It's just going to lose the essence or the most important thing about it. My message is going to become muddled. So it's not that I have a preference for either one. I don't think like grand landscapes are better than intimate scenes or vice versa, or I don't seek a certain kind of one. It's just like the more you simplify, the more likely it is that everything is going to be cohesive within the frame because the more you include, it just creates more possibility or probability that it's not all going to work together. And it'd be much better to separate those different things into individual photographs. So, does that answer your question or was that a little?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and so when you go out there, do you find yourself like, do you often start a little wider and then you narrow it down, or do you do you sometimes take like a series like on the last one you were showing where you showed the trees and the waterfall behind it, like um do you have a series where like it's this view and then maybe like an adjacent view and another one, and each one is their own scene, or like, I'm just curious, just getting in your head a little bit here.
Yeah, and that's a great question because I feel like most people tend to think of it as like they're presented with this really large scene and then they're trying to distill it down to the most important parts for them as the photographer. I would actually explain my process as being completely opposite of that. So what I usually do is I really zero in on some kind of element or object or scene that calls out to me, and I look at it all by itself, completely isolated. And I start out with the simplest idea possible. And then I slowly add complexity to that idea until it no longer works by including things around it that I feel complement it. And then once I get to a point where there's nothing else I can include that will complement the scene, and like more inclusion will only detract from the scene at that point, that's where I stop, and that's where I decide on my composition. So I actually, and it's not that I do this like physically, like with a telephoto lens, and I'm switching lenses all the way until I arrive to the composition that I want. It's more visually before I even pull out my camera or start or turn it on or start looking at it with any kind of a lens. And that's what helps me determine like which lens I'm going to use, because it's like, okay, if I want to include these things, then I need to be this wide or this zoomed in. Um, and so, yeah, it's just about starting out with the simplest idea and just adding a little bit of complexity until it no longer works, here and there.
That's really cool. So it's kind of like seeing something that is the essence of the place, or the image in your mind, and kind of expanding a little bit to where it you have like a feeling of where it loses that intimacy, or that special
Exactly.
something. And then
It
so that's really
yeah,
cool, because you're not starting like really really wide and trying, like you said,
right.
distill it down. You're going in and seeing like where the edge is when you expand it, which is kind of different.
Right. So I also really enjoy writing. And so I would compare it to writing, like when somebody came up with the story of Batman, they probably thought of Batman first, and then they came up with the Joker, the Riddler, these other additional characters that would make the story more interesting and complement Batman and show his personality more. They would challenge him and cause him to, have to grow and all these things. So like I think of the main character, and then I slowly add additional supporting characters. That's like the equivalent, I would say.
That's a really good thing to keep in mind, even if your end goal is to capture a wide vista, because you don't want to lose what's special about it. And I think that, like, if you do start right there and you expand, you're more likely to keep that feeling, because you're going to notice when you get to the edges where
Exactly.
that is no longer, front and center, and it's not having impact. And that's what we want, is photos that have impact. So I think that's a good technique to keep in mind, no matter how wide you're going to end up, and it can
Yeah.
really help you make that decision. So I think, because you are doing something different, and your photography, it does have that impact. That is a way that, as photographers, we get noticed, whether it's with our audience, like our kind of like the fans of our work, our followers or whatever, but also with magazines and books. So I'm curious on when you first got published, and where, and also, did you seek that out, or did other people find you and approach you because of your work?
So the sole reason I started pursuing nature photography as a career and quit my other job and started doing it full time was because I was already having solicitations. People were asking to buy prints. They were asking me to if I could teach them. They were asking me if I was going to be organizing workshops. And so then it just started to make sense to fulfill this kind of demand that was slowly growing organically. It wasn't like I was trying to figure out, oh, how can I make some photographs that people are going to want to buy, or what kind of products can I make in order to make money? It was more like people were asking for the products, and I slowly started to fulfill that desire that they had for my work and for teaching them and things like that. And so when I first got published in a magazine, they reached out to me. I was never thinking that I deserved to do it, or um, like wondering why I hadn't been published or anything like that. It was just something that came organically. And then they asked if I'd be interested in writing more stuff and um, being included more. And then other magazines see you in that magazine usually. It's kind of like an organic word of mouth thing. And so then they reach out to you. And so, really, all of the things that I've done have been a result of what people have asked, if I can provide for them. And then there's certain things that people ask for, and I'm just not into it, and I don't accept it, or I don't go down that road because it just doesn't go in line with how I approach photography and what makes it meaningful to me.
So, did people find you mostly on social media or through your website?
So the way I see social media is when I post on there, what I'm doing, and I only use Instagram. I don't use any other social media apps. I post on Facebook like once in a blue moon. Um, for the people that are on there and not on Instagram for some reason. But the reason I do that is because if you have lots of different platforms that you have to post on, that's just really time consuming. And I realize a lot of my audience actually overlaps on these different platforms. So it's not like I'm reaching different people really. So I just decided to focus on the one that I had the biggest audience and just put all of my effort into that one instead of trying to spread myself too thin where I really wouldn't be getting much return for it. And so Instagram is the one that I post on the most frequently, about once a week. And the way I see social media is you are putting out, at least for me, I'm putting out these virtual billboards that will hopefully grab people's attention as they're scrolling through. And what I want that to do is to lead them to my website where they can have a curated, much more intentional, conducive experience with viewing my portfolio. So my website is organized and curated very well. That's something I take really seriously. And so that is to provide the best viewing experience possible. Instagram, Facebook, none of these social media apps were created to be the best experience in viewing any kind of visual art. For starters, an iPhone is one of the worst ways you could possibly view photography at all because of external lighting conditions that are going to cause glare on the screen. It's obviously really small, so you can't see details. Obviously, the best experience is going to be seeing a print a lot larger, or at least on a desktop monitor or a laptop where it's like 5 or 6 times as big as on your screen. So I don't expect a whole lot out of social media. I kind of just accept it for what it is. And so at the very best, it's just a way to, kind of like a funnel to attract people, but then hopefully lead them to my website where they're going to have a much better viewing experience. And so it definitely has been important. Like, as much as I would like to just stop using social media entirely for a number of reasons,
Right.
it is kind of a necessary evil because otherwise my website would just be sitting there on the internet and nobody would ever discover it without it. That's how I feel.
Exactly. Exactly. So yeah, so it's a great way to drive traffic to wherever we want our viewers to go to it. It's funny and sad, at the same time that, social media is not the best place to be viewing photography. I mean, they compress the images and, there's like so much going on, like people have very short attention spans. You have like literally like a half a second to grab somebody, but
Yeah.
yet probably 98% of all art and photography is viewed first and sometimes only on social media. So that's something to keep in mind is really like, that is your first point of contact with someone who may become a follower or a fan or maybe someone that you're going to do business with. So how did you get, so you were doing your photography, you were, putting your stuff out on Instagram and you were starting to get noticed and get published in some magazines. What made you decide to make your first book?
So, like you said before, you were kind of saying it's something that most photographers want to do. And I think it is something that most photographers should want to do. Um, First of all, just printing your work is a great experience. And I really feel like the physical print is the final product of every single photo that I take. Like that's like the end result that I hope for, that I will be able to at least make one print of it and see it printed. It's just a really special experience. And so the way I see a book is like this very affordable collection of prints that people can purchase from you, because obviously buying like 120 8 by 12 luster prints, that's going to be like over $1,000. Just maybe even just the cost of printing it, without your markup, so you can make some money. So a book is like this very affordable way that people can see a body of work that you've curated and organized into a specific sequence. And then also, since I love writing, it's obviously a great medium for adding some writing. That's the main reason that books exist. So for me personally, it's something just really conducive to the way that I approach photography. I always release my work in galleries, in sets. I never release like single images. And usually I have something to say about those images. So a book is just kind of like, 4 galleries, which could be like, my first book. Um, I'll go to that real quick. Um, my first book is it has 4 different sections which cover 4 different kinds of ecosystems. And so they're kind of individual, but the reason I put them together is because I felt overall it made a cohesive book. They all, it has the same focus, the same message across all of them. But then like my next book that I'm coming out with, it's all from the same area. And so those different sections are based on different ideas. It's not based on different ecosystems. They're pretty much the same ecosystem for the most part. They're all in the desert, in the Utah desert, but they each portray different feelings to a different extent. And so it's just something that like works really well for me since I hang on to my images for a while anyways before I release them. And um, I always like to write a little bit more to explain, um, issues that these places face in terms of climate change and development and pollution and things like that, because that's something that's really hard to convey in photographs. And so I feel like the medium of photography in combination with the medium of writing can be very powerful in giving a fuller, more complete message about the places that you photograph, especially if you're environmentally minded. And so yeah, that's I don't know. I think it's like at least for now, it's kind of the best way that I can present my work for the way that I approach it. I know that's not the case for everybody, but for me personally, it's something that I really enjoy doing, and I'm really happy with the end result.
Now, I think that's amazing. And, I actually talk to my coaching clients about this all the time. You know, um, our images need to be more than something that is just, a pretty picture. There's got to be some feeling behind it because anyone can walk up with an iPhone and just take a snapshot like, nature is pretty. So, in most cases. But I think that like if getting published or even growing a following or writing your own, having your own coffee table book someday is a goal for you, when you write your social media posts, it's a very good place to practice the art of getting into the feeling, like bringing people there. What did you feel? Why did you take the picture? If you can't articulate why you took the picture, that's just something, it's like a muscle. You need to practice it because if you can express your feelings, through the visual art, but then also complement it with your words, then other people will feel that too. But you have to be able to open up enough. And that's hard sometimes on social media. It feels sort of vulnerable to talk about your feelings and your art.
Yeah,
Did you find
but
did you find when you first started getting, when you first started posting like that, it was like a little hard to kind of open up and talk about your scenes?
I wasn't like hesitant or anything. It definitely was like a great exercise because, like you said, it helped me identify. Because like a lot of times intuitively we'll be attracted to something, but we can't like completely explain why or articulate it. And that's okay. I don't think you really have to. But the better you can identify that, the more you can play into it and the better you can compose the scene. And you'll be able to make better decisions because you'll know, okay, I need to include this, I need to exclude this because this is going to add to my message. This is going to detract from it. This is going to add a certain mood. This is going to add a different kind of mood that I don't want. All those things can only be deliberately done if you're aware of what it is exactly you want to show and say with the photograph. And so I didn't really feel like hesitant about it. I wasn't embarrassed or anything like that. Um, it was more, and it wasn't so much as like sharing my story or talking about myself or why I photographed the image. It was more about the subject. Like I just want to help people connect with the subject matter more and not even think about me as a photographer or have it reflect on me in any way. I'm trying to help them connect more with the things that I photograph, not with me, or elevate what they think of me. I want them to think more highly of nature. That's what I care about. I want them to see more value in nature through my photographs. I don't really care what they think about me as a photographer. So it's a lot easier to kind of, I think a lot of photographers hate self-promotion, but you don't need to do self-promotion. Just promote the things that you're photographing, like promote the subjects you're photographing, the places you're photographing, why they're special. You don't need to talk about yourself, and I think it's actually more powerful, and people can connect with it more if you leave yourself out of it. And in a way, it can add more mystery to the photos, and because people kind of lose themselves in them, and they can immerse themselves in the scenery more because they're not thinking about how it was made or who made it or things like that. And so um
Right.
the other thing
But
I was going to say is also like you don't need to feel too vulnerable because most likely 90% of people aren't going to read your captions anyway. So
okay,
it's like a great way to like practice something without, it's not going to be to your detriment if you mess up or anything like that. I don't think at all.
right. Yeah, it's not all that serious. But definitely I think, just photography is a 2D medium. Pretty much, well, you're a filmmaker. So, in video and other art forms, you have complementary elements. So like if you went to a movie, they're not just speaking. Like they're speaking, but they're also adding like a certain like way of lighting the scene to
Yeah, you have
complement the
visuals, you
feeling.
have
Yeah, the
narration,
energy
you
and
have
the
dialogue, music, so many
exactly.
things that you can. Yeah,
Right. So with photography, we have, the visuals. And then I think if we can add some powerful words, whether that's, about our journey there or whether it's just about the place. What I was saying is like, sometimes it's there's like a middle ground between just presenting facts about
right.
something, which doesn't really like, a brochure could present the facts about the place,
It's a
but
little
when you get
sterile
in
though.
there, yeah, it is. So you need to share like a little bit more than that. And obviously, what you're doing is extremely powerful and it's really connecting with people. I know I had mentioned to a couple of people that are in my community that you're speaking at our photography club, and that a couple of my clients, I told them that you would be on the summit too. Nobody else knows yet. By the time this is out, everybody will know. And they said, "Oh my gosh, I love his books. I love his work. Oh, I'm so excited." And I say, "Great. Like, what do you want to know? I'm going to ask the questions." So, you're making an impact with your images and your words. So, with your books, did you self-publish these books, or what's the process of like actually bringing the book from idea to form?
Yeah, so that's the great thing about being an artist in this day and age. You don't rely on, you can kind of create your own opportunities instead of having to wait for them to come down from heaven one day. So the way I started doing photography is I kind of thought like, oh, wouldn't it be awesome to be a professional photographer and travel around the world for like National Geographic or something and go on these assignments and photograph certain places and then like write about them and do these things. But instead of waiting for National Geographic to email me, which they never have, I was just like, I'm going to be my own investor and I'm going to fund these trips and I'm just going to do these things regardless and then see what comes of it. And so doing a book, it's the same thing. I ended up self publishing them for a number of reasons. And there can be some benefits to getting a book published, but if that opportunity never comes, then you're never going to make a book either. So that's like the main hurdle that you have to jump over. Like you have to be well known. Someone has to reach out to you, or be interested, or accept you when you reach out to them and want to work with you. And I've had offers to publish books through other companies, but the reason that I haven't and I've chosen to self-publish them is because I don't want to ever have to make any kind of compromise in the kind of work that I present. So maybe the publisher doesn't like the text and they want me to change some of the wording. Maybe they feel it's too controversial. Maybe they feel it's too esoteric. I don't want any of that. I want to be able to say whatever I want to say in the writing. And I want to be able to choose the photographs that I present, because maybe they'll say, hey, these photographs are kind of quiet and a little too subtle. Why don't we take these ones from your portfolio that have more impact? Or, if we're choosing the cover, they might want to choose something that's more attention grabbing. Whereas I would like to choose something that's a bit quieter and intriguing and kind of, more mysterious instead of just like loud and shouting at you, something like that. That's just my style. That's the way I handle things. So self-publishing is great because you get to do everything exactly how you want. You have full control over everything, and you don't need to make any kind of artistic compromises in the vision that you have with your book. The main hurdle with self-publishing, though, is that you have to fund it all yourself. But luckily, there are lots of ways that you can do crowdfunding. For my two books, something that has really helped is I've made them available for pre-order beforehand. So you can already start selling copies before they've arrived at your house. And that way you can move some inventory immediately as soon as they come. And it also helps you to pay for it a little bit. So, there are lots of avenues that make it possible. So it doesn't have to entirely fall on your shoulders if you do have a supportive audience.
So that's amazing. So you have full artistic control of over the whole book. And it's like, I think anyone who owns their own business will testify to this, is when you have your own business, it's a blessing and a curse that you do everything.
Everything
So
is up
when
to you.
so
Yeah.
yeah, so it's great because you have full artistic control, but then you probably had to learn how to do a lot of things for yourself. And that's good because then you can replicate it, and do it again and again, and you don't have to rely on someone else to do it. So in terms of like just laying out the book, what program do you use to lay out the pages, and how do you decide on the flow of the book and how you want to put it all together? Can you walk us through the creative aspect of that, please?
So I think when it comes to creativity, the easier something is, the less technical it is, the simpler it is, the more creative you can be, because you don't have these like limitations or like learning curves or things like that. You're just so what I basically, the process for like making this new book that has all new images that I've never released before, I just started hanging on to my work, and I was just, after I would process an image that I felt could be part of this book, I would throw it in this private gallery that I have on my website. And so I started seeing this like body of work building and building and building. And then once it became large enough to start breaking it down into different sections and organizing it and things like that, I started to curate it. I'd remove certain images that felt kind of redundant. Like maybe there's two that are both great, but they're similar. So you don't need both. You need the one that, just fits in with the book the best, and you can release the other one on its own. And so, this body of work just naturally grew and grew, and I just curated it and got rid of the stuff that I felt didn't need to be in there. And then once I kind of felt like I had the final selection, I started laying it out just in a Google slide presentation, which is just really easy to use. You can just throw images in there and move them around. InDesign is what you end up having to use to make the final PDF that you send to the printer. But what I did is, instead of taking months and months to learn InDesign, which is a pretty technical and difficult program to learn, and also I just didn't want to make any mistakes with the layout, having images crooked or off or not aligned right or too close to the margin. stuff like that, I decided to just make a really simple layout that I could send to a designer and just pay them, because they're the professionals at that, to do that in way less time and have it perfect, and have any issues be their responsibility instead of falling on me. And so yeah, just doing like a slide presentation and just putting like, if it's a 2-page spread, it just has one image across the whole slide. If it's two individual images, like a 2-page, like a pairing, just having two images on that one slide so you can see them together, because that's a really important thing with the sequencing too. On each page, you want the images to complement each other or contrast in a nice way. So that just really helped me start visualizing and doing the creative part of the layout, and then I'll let somebody else do the more monotonous and mundane, like technical part. Uh, yeah, instead.
Right. Well, and that's kind of dicey too when because you're going to order a bunch of books. So you want to make sure that it's right. And when you were talking about that, I was wondering, do they send you a proof, or do you get like some sort of like sample book before you do the whole run, or how does that part work?
Yeah, so when you're self-publishing, the printer, once you send off the PDF, the final PDF of the book for them to print, they will make a set of digital proofs, which are made on inkjet printers in CMYK, so it's the same profile. And so they'll send you this stack of every single page printed with this printer. And these proofs are for you to have a reference for the color accuracy, because once they print it on the offset machine, which is what they actually use to make the physical books, things can obviously shift and it's a little different. And if you don't have this kind of reference, it's hard for you and the printer to communicate and say, hey, can you compare this page to the proof print of this page? And you can see like, that it's a bit more yellow or this or that. So once you get the proofs and you say the proofs look great, that's like set in stone now. That's the reference for the book. That's like what they're trying to match color wise, because the offset printers actually have way greater detail and resolution. The contrast usually looks better, but the thing that can kind of be tricky is the color. And so then once they print the books, or they'll print maybe half of the order, before they bind them or anything, they'll send you a folded and gathered copy, which is the printed book, all the pages, just without the binding and all that. So it's just, again, it's just all stacked together. And then you can go through that and compare it to the proofs. And so if anything looks really off, you can tell them, and then they'll fix that signature, because they print the book in different sections. And so maybe one of the signatures will be a little bit too yellow, so they can just reprint that like 12-page signature depending on the size of your book, and fix that and then send it back to you for approval. So there is this like approval process. It's not just like you send it off and then 3 months later all these books show up and you're stuck with them. There is a bit of flexibility, and they will work with you to a certain extent, as long as you are working with a reputable publisher that does have a high standard, or at least as high as your own, because that can be an issue as well. What's good enough for them might not be nearly good enough for you. So it's really important to choose the printer that you use very wisely.
Yeah, I think that every photographer out there has had the experience of where you order a print and it comes back looking nothing like it did on your monitor, and then you have to go back and forth and like dial it in. And a book is a collection of a lot of prints, so there's a lot of opportunity there for something to go haywire. So that's really good advice. And so that's good to know, because that part of it seems a little nerve-wracking. So it's nice to know that there's a little bit of back and forth, and it's not just it all gets printed and you get like several boxes of something that's not the way you wanted it. So since this is your third book, the one that's coming out now, I
So
imagine
it's
that you've
actually
learned
my second. It's my second printed book. You're probably thinking three because I came out with an ebook in between these two,
oh, okay.
but that one
Okay.
wasn't printed.
All right. Well, even being your second book, I'm sure that you've learned a lot in the process of these two books. Is there something that you'd never do again in that process? Or is there anything that you would definitely recommend as being really, really important? Just what have you learned in this process of publishing two books?
Well, the hardest lesson I learned with the first one was choosing to work with a publisher that didn't have the same standards that I had. And so basically, a long, drawn out story short, they produced a book that did not meet my standards. It fell far below them. And it was something that I would have felt embarrassed to release and charge money for. And so instead of um, accepting that book and selling it, I ended up having to fire them while they already had a lot of my money. But it was important enough to me to make this product look as perfect as possible. And I had to go and hire another publisher, which is the one that I'm working now with on the second book because he did such a great job. And so that was a very expensive, painful, time consuming, just horrible, like nightmare of a lesson. But it just, the reason I had chosen them was because it was a local printer here in Utah that I felt I could work with closely because it was so important for me for it to turn out right and oversee a lot of the whole process. But when things would go wrong, instead of trying to fix it, they were kind of saying, hey, nobody else is going to notice. You're just being like overly critical because it's your work and you made it. Everyone else is going to think it's great. Like it's definitely good enough. And that just wasn't, I couldn't do that. I couldn't stomach it. And so that was very expensive. That book ended up costing way more than it needed to because they didn't want to give me my money back. We ended up they ended up filing a lawsuit against me to try to get more money, and all these things. And so that just dragged out for a couple of years. And so that was definitely the most important lesson I learned. And making the second book has been way smoother now that I am working with somebody that is, has a they have high expectations for their work. They want to they want to make books for other photographers, and so they don't want to have bad experiences with photographers because that could be bad word of mouth for them. So they take it very seriously. And anytime something does go wrong, because like you said, there is a lot of margin for error. Inevitably, there are going to be things that you need to fix. It's not going to turn out perfect the first time, most likely. But as long as they're willing to fix those things and work with you on them, that's the important part. So it's not about something wrong happening. Like it's just a matter of fixing it when something wrong does inevitably happen.
That Thank you so much for being so open about that. I'm sure that was a really painful and stressful situation. And, I think that's super important, whether you're, obviously if you're making a book and you have a lot into that, a lot of time, a lot of money, and, just a lot of your heart and soul invested. But even when you're doing prints, it's so important to work with a printing company who you feel has your back, especially like you said, if you are selling something, this is representative of like your heart, your soul, your work, and just who you are as a photographer. And if it's not just right, then that just feels bad. And yeah, maybe somebody else isn't going to notice the tiny imperfections that we notice, but why would we go through all the lengths to get like the best gear and make the effort to get out to the places and do all the editing and stuff like that, just have someone else tell you, oh, that detail's not important. So yeah, really, really great piece of advice there to find people that get you and get what you do and put the quality into their work as much as you put it into yours. That's excellent. So just I have like I think two more questions for you.
Well, sorry,
One
you were
thing,
asking like if there is something good that I learned from making a book.
yes, yeah,
So it's actually like kind of the silver lining of that. There is like a good lesson that I learned from that experience, luckily, in that it really solidified my artistic integrity because I had this, I have four kids. It was during the pandemic, work was a lot slower. Um, everybody knows how hard those 2 years were, like no matter what profession you're in. I had this like it wasn't like a temptation because I never even felt inclined to accept this book that didn't meet my standards. But it was like a really big challenge for me, financially and this and that. And so it wasn't easy to stick to my gut. It was like a really big, bold decision that I had to make, but I just had to trust myself and trust that people would appreciate, you know, creating something that exceeded their expectations and that was like the best possible presentation of nature and my photographs of nature. And so um the lesson that would share from that is the importance in making something that you enjoy yourself first and foremost, because what is the point in producing something that you can't even sit down and look at and enjoy yourself? So it just solidified this importance that I've always felt in, first of all, always satisfying myself with my art, never sharing, publishing, or making anything that I don't feel good about myself. And always adhering to my own standards, never trying to cater to my audience, never trying to do what is trendy at the time or what other people will like. I never ever think about that. And this was an experience where by making that choice, you know, it actually paid off because my book sold out in less than 2 years, way faster than I thought it would. So everything went, you know, luckily went really well for me. And so that just solidified my belief in, like, you know, as long as you do things that satisfy yourself and you do your very, very best, like things will ultimately most likely work out for you financially as well.
I love that. And I'm so glad to hear that. I'm really glad that you that you shared the silver lining. So that's fantastic. And I love it that you stuck to your guns and especially during that really challenging time. I know that that was really challenging for a lot of people who you know make a lot of their living doing workshops and traveling and
Mhm.
teaching and things like that, and then all of a sudden, like the whole world just went nuts. So that's really good to hear. I'm very happy to hear that. So in terms of once your book is done and it's all exactly the way that you need it to be, um, and like you pointed out earlier, a lot of photographers hate self promotion. How do you go about promoting it? And like what channels do you use? What have you found to be the most effective way to let people know about this and to actually get the orders in the door?
So, first of all, I think if somebody makes something great, it has a way of promoting itself. People can't help but talk about it and share it with their friends. And so, word of mouth is always something that I kind of hope to, it's not something you can control, right? People are going to feel a certain way, and that's not really up to you. But there are certain things you can do to make that more likely that people will receive it positively. And a lot of that has to do with the kind of audience you build. And so the audience that I have built has always just come from sharing the work that I make that I enjoy first and foremost. And then the people that genuinely resonate with that are going to want to follow me and continue to see my work because there's this like sense of trust that they have with me, that I'm always going to do my best. I'm always going to create imagery that is meaningful in some sense. It's not superficial. It's always authentic. It comes from my heart or my soul or whatever you want to call it. I'm not trying to cater to certain trends or anything like that. So it's not like one day I'm just going to take a random turn and start, you know, presenting a completely different kind of photography or a completely different kind of feeling or change the way that I feel about nature and the subject matter of my imagery. So just organically building an audience is something that is very important. And it just builds this sense of trust. And so every time you put something out, they're going to be more willing to spend money on it, because they already have a good idea of what they can expect. They're not scared that they're going to buy it and it's not going to be great or anything like that. And so that was another thing about self-publishing. I felt like I already had grown a large enough audience on my own that I could just reach through social media and my website and sell it directly to them rather than relying on a publisher to, reach a broader audience in order to be able to sell enough copies to make it a viable, um, make it viable financially. So I just kind of hoped that once I put it out there, people would talk about it and share it with each other, and it would just promote itself. And that is exactly what happened. And it's happening with my second book as well. Um, it's just a lot more authentic, organic, and yeah, I've never wanted to like try to sell people on my work or convince them that it's meaningful. I'd rather just make it meaningful, and then they can see it. I don't want to have to talk it up, or I just like my work to be able to speak for itself. And so I always do my best to allow for that to happen.
Well, it's working because that's how I found out about you is I heard your name mentioned several times, and I ask my club, and when I'm doing a summit I usually poll the audience and I say, what photographers would you like to learn from, or whose work do you really resonate with, and stuff like that. And then I get a billion responses, and then I start looking at the responses, or sometimes people will just tell me, have you seen Eric Bennett's work? And then they'll start telling me like about your work. So that's when you're really connecting with somebody, because it's making a lasting impression, and they want to tell, just like if you go to see a great movie or you eat at a fantastic restaurant, you feel inclined to tell other people because you enjoyed it and you want to share that with them. So whatever you're doing, it's working. Keep doing that. So would you have any piece of advice for someone who is trying to build that organic connection? And is it a lot of patience? Does it just take a lot of time? Are there things that you can do that you found to be really effective in terms of, you said you concentrate on Instagram as your one platform. So, does it just take several years, or what have you found to be the most effective way to build that organic audience of people who really resonate with you?
So that's kind of a trick question because I feel like as long as you're trying, it's not organic.
Right, right.
Organic is something that just happens naturally. It's just a byproduct of whatever you're doing. It's not your motive or your primary goal. It's just like a secondary thing that happens. And so, one of my favorite quotes is by C.S. Lewis, and he says, "Put first things first, and you get second things thrown in. Put second things first, and you lose both first and second things." And so, whenever you like have an ulterior motive or some kind of end result in mind that you prioritize over the process of doing something, I feel like that's just where it's like not likely to succeed, and it's not going to be as good as it possibly can because you're not putting your heart into the actual making of whatever it is you're doing. You're just hoping for something to happen, like to make it all worthwhile. Like it depends. Its significance depends on the end result or the outcome. And I don't think any great art is ever made that way, or photography or any kind of creative endeavor, even if it isn't considered as art. Um, and so I I can't tell somebody like what that roadmap looks like. I can't give them instructions on how to achieve what I did because looking back, it's not straightforward, right? It's just something that happened. I'm just here now, but the way I got here is just by focusing on my photographs, photographing things that only I connect with deeply, that make me want to take photographs, and doing it in the way that I find satisfying to me, spending time in places the way that I enjoy spending time in them, going to the places that genuinely draw me and attract me, and then making the photographs that I feel like making, or not making photographs if I don't feel like it, never forcing anything. So if you allow your photography or your body of work to just form organically in that way, then I think everything else can just it's likely to fall in place. I think if you're really putting your heart into it. Um, but yeah, I really can't provide a specific kind of roadmap or anything like that. As much as I would like to know, because then maybe I could like do it better myself. But it's
Right.
just something that happened. Luckily, I think luck plays a huge part in it.
Yeah. And so maybe some people might call it luck. Some people might just, some people might have, these are the best practices, post at this time of day and post this many times or whatever. You know, I think that it all boils down to energy. It's the energy that of when you go out to create, staying true to that integrity. Like you said, I mean, you have a lot of integrity where you're not going to compromise on your vision. And, you just put out like consistently, um, this, you put out work that means something to you, and you do it consistently. And because you're doing that and you're showing up consistently with that energy, then you really can't help but attract people who resonate with that. And I guess that's all there is to it. I think that, sometimes people get impatient with the process because they have goals, or they want to be somewhere like a little bit faster. And maybe that's a lesson here, with this interview, but also like, with your book. It's about the stillness and the silence and the energy of nature and connecting with that. And I think that, that resonates through everything that you do. And I think that we can take a lesson in just staying true to that. Like the same things that connect us in nature are going to be the same things if we allow that to shine through everything else that we put out. Then the people that connect with that will, like what they say, if you build it, they will come.
Right. Yeah. And
That kind of
so,
thing.
like kind of to your point, I feel like if you're looking for shortcuts in whatever it is you're doing, you're probably not doing the right thing anyways. Because if you really love something, you're not looking to condense your experience or your time that you spend in it. It's like enough, like there never is like enough time that you can put into it, right? And so if you're trying to like shorten the timeline or speed things up, you probably don't have genuine intentions behind what you're doing anyways, and you should probably look for something else that is more fulfilling and that enriches your life instead of something that you just want to get done as fast as possible to be able to do something else or this or that.
That's funny that you say that because um I live just a few minutes away from like my favorite destination, which is Lake Tahoe. And so I can go to the lake and shoot whenever I want. But I've noticed that when I go there and I get there in plenty of time, even if I've been to the same place a million times, if I get there in plenty of time and, I let everything else go and I get into the zone, and then I start shooting, I make much better photographs than, if I just say, it's looking like it's going to be nice. I could rush out the door and go over there. It feels icky, you know. I feel like
Yeah.
I don't know. It's weird, and I don't know if anyone else can relate, but it almost feels to me like a lack of respect for the the intimacy of what I'm doing. And so sometimes my kids will be like, why don't we just run over there real quick? And I'm like, I don't know. I'd rather just like sit and watch it with my eyeballs than show up and get all my gear out and take a photo and then like leave and go home. It feels weird.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of like, you have kids as well. There are certain things you do for them every single day, and you can either see it as like something that you need to do and get through and just like, just get it done, or you can see it as like a bonding experience, like reading a book to your son before bedtime. Like it can be this, if you just allow like a couple more minutes and you don't rush through it, there can be this opportunity for deeper connection. And I feel like if you do those things, like they go to sleep better and they sleep longer and stuff like that because they just go to bed in a good mood. Whereas if you just like go and do the same thing, but in a very rushed and disconnected manner, you're not going to have the same result. And so spending time in nature, it can't be rushed. Like I think it's kind of funny that there's like this kind of buzzword now of slow photography, because that's like really the only way you can practice any kind of meaningful photography. It's kind of a redundant thing, like saying,
Yes.
photography is slow. Otherwise, it's just not it's not meaningful or anything like that. It doesn't have the capability to be that way. And so, allowing yourself more time to connect with things, you're going to notice a lot more things, and your relationship with them is going to deepen. Just like with a person, the more time you spend with them, the more you're going to understand them and notice certain things about them and feel a certain way that other people probably don't feel about them.
Yeah. So everybody just slow your roll, slow down, get out there and, make a connection, and it's gonna show through. And then and it's great because I think that's one of the best things about photography is we get out there and we do the things, and then when someone gets the book or someone gets a print or something like that, they get to benefit from that because they put it in their space, and then as they're going through their daily life, which, let's face it, like everyone's daily life can be way too busy sometimes, and even if it only gives them like 1 minute of peace or just a second of happiness when they look at it and it helps them slow down, I think that's great because it just has a ripple effect. So um I think that's a privilege that we have as an artist, so we owe it to people to really, you know do it with impact. And I love how, like, these photos that you're showing are these very small scenes, and but they're impactful, and there's not a lot of like extra stuff, and it's just small moments of beauty. And I think that's great. So Eric, tell everybody a little bit about where they can get your book, because I know that it's not just, art collectors and stuff. Like, a lot of photographers love to collect I love collecting other photographers' books, and I enjoy that collection. So tell us how we can collect your book. And then I want to tell you guys about something that Eric has for you. I'm going to put that in the email where you found this recording.
So by the time this comes out, I will most likely be shipping books already. So right now it's available for pre-order, but by then you'll probably get your book fairly quickly if you order one. You can find them on my website. That's the only place that I'm selling them. So bennettfilm.com under the book section. Like I said, my first book is already sold out, but yeah, you can find my new book on there and then also an ebook. So that's it. Pretty
Very cool.
simple.
Awesome. So yeah, you guys go over there and check it out. Also, check out Eric's Instagram if you want to see what he's up to and just kind of peruse a little bit more of his work. I'm feeling so relaxed just from watching all of these beautiful images that Eric is showing to us while we're chatting. And Eric has made an amazing offer for you guys. If you are resonating with what he's talking about and you'd like to learn more, I'm putting a discount code in the email where you found this recording, and it's 20% off of any of his tutorials on post processing. And then he has a collection of what he calls essential theories. So, talking about composition and some of the things that help him make his really meaningful and impactful images. And then you can incorporate that into your own practice. So I encourage you guys to go over there, check that out, download his discount code, and definitely connect with him on social media and follow his journey. Eric, I thank you so much for spending the time with me today and for being very open about your process and just helping. It's enriched our journeys as photographers to learn from you and the things that you've created and what you've been through to get those creations out into the world. So thank you so much for being so open.
I appreciate it. And I'd like to say thank you for the opportunity to share some of that and talk about something that is meaningful to me.
Well, you're very welcome. And it was a pleasure to bring you on board for this. as I was telling you when we first started chatting, before we started recording, that I call this summit the Rising Tide Photography Summit because there's a saying that a rising tide lifts all boats. And so I feel that as photographers, we've all been there at the beginning where we feel frustrated and we're not able to maybe make the images that we feel like we want to make just because we need to hone some skills, or we need to learn a little bit more. Maybe we just need to slow down. So I love working with people who get that and remember that, and are open to sharing so that it can help other people grow in their art, and just it makes for an amazing community. So thank you for being a part of that, and I'm really glad that we got to connect.
I appreciate it. Likewise.
Awesome. All right, you guys. Well, thank you so much for watching today's episode of the Rising Tide Photography Summit. And we will be back tomorrow with some more goodness for you. I hope that you guys are all enjoying it, and we will talk to you later. Thank you. Bye.